take a look at your own screenplay and organize what you have so far. It doesn't matter whether you have much at all. Even if you have one thing, you can then say, well, if I have one thing, okay, so I have, the character has a life just like me, so what have I got? I've got work, I've got friends, and I've got my significant other. If the nightmare that I've thought of falls in the work area, what would be his or her character nightmare, and what would be his or her, I forget what the third one was, I'm a little tired, but you get the idea, that whatever you don't know can be inferred from what you already know, because we're working in a kind of archetypal perception, and we tend to think of things in threes, and this is one of the things I like to teach in dramas, that, whatever it is, it's three things. So if his nightmare is about work, well, what about his sister and his own self-image as a cop, right? That's very important, which has been badly tarnished. And his disillusionment with the institution that a cop could shoot another cop for money. So this now brings us to what we can work on here. And this idea that we have to do the dream and the nightmare is very important. But now I want you to consider one thing. The relationship, as I'm going to remind you again, between Act 1 and Act 3 is what it is. So whatever you come up with in Act 1 has to be in some way, quote-unquote, paid off in Act 3, whether it's happy ending, sad ending, or an ending that really is the result in Garden State of what happens in a different part of the movie. And that's part of what, when I talk about this new adventure, which is again out of the length of the seminar, but the idea is that in the new adventure, it's what happens in Act 2 that kind of creates what Act 3 is going to be, though it's a blend of Act 1 and what happens in Act 2. And if you think of how people's lives are going, it's pretty clear that an awful lot of us are having some pretty tornado-type things happening in Act 2 with all this financial stuff. So it's very important to start to understand that in the 2 years or whatever it's going to take you, I don't necessarily it's 2 years, it could be 2 weeks, but that by the time your story is ready to be made, things change. It's how the news changes us. So 1 week, one of my students actually was writing a political comedy in which Bush was the president, and it was very funny and very timely. But then the next week, Obama was elected, and everything that he had was basically out of date. So in a certain way, we want to both reflect, what's timely and what's not timely. So you have to make some reasoned decisions. Now, if we look at page 29. Here is an important thing to consider. Some movies, many movies, have the first act be the dream, so we see what's going right in their life, and then in Act 2, we see what's going wrong. But other movies, like Garden State, Act 1 is really the nightmare, because when we meet him, Andrew Larchman is numb. He's sleeping in an antiseptic room that has not much in it but pills. His father calls to tell him his mother has died. He has awful traffic. He goes to his horrible job as a waiter, and then has to get on a plane and fly back to New York. So certainly, and then he has to attend the funeral, and then he goes to a party with his friends, which again does not in any way make him come alive, and he feels just as disenfranchised. And so really, Act 1 of Garden State is Andrew Larchman's nightmare. So obviously, you're all smart, and I'm smart, so duh, if it's got to be 4 magic questions, if the first act is a nightmare, then Act 2, Part 1 has to be the dream, and that's a trick. So right here and now, consider whether Act 1 for your character is really the dream or the nightmare. If it's something in between, that's a further discussion, but I would ask you to make a strong choice to create the events, to take it strongly as either the dream or the nightmare, because it'll be hard to get to Act 2 if you don't. So once we do that, we can now infer the events. Remember the nightmare, so he wants to be a good cop. Now he may not be able to be a good cop, etc. This is basic. The trick here is to add that tornado that we spoke about, or you will not get enough torque to get yourself over the hump. And that's what you have to ask yourself. Now, where do you get the tornado? That's a good question. That's the kind of thing that would keep me up nights. And the answer is, I don't know. And that's a really good answer, because you don't know either, and you don't need to. What you need to do is you need to say to yourself, okay, I'm doing an amazing job. This is my first screenplay, and somehow I have gotten, 3/4 of my film in an amazingly short time. And now I'm stumped, And I don't even know why I need this darn tornado. Well, we're getting towards the end of the seminar, so I will tell you that without the tornado, we cannot do Act 2, Part 2. And that's all I'm going to tell you, because, I mean, next week is it's my second favorite week, obviously, I'm going to say that. But this Act 2, Part 2 stuff is very, very cool, and how you get there is cool. But what's important to remember is that, stories have to go forward. And someone once said to me, so, what's the one question that you would say you have to ask? And if you only ask one question, there's only one way to do the screenplay, and you're on a desert island, and you only had one question, what would the question be? And the answer, and you may want to write this down and stick it on your computer, is what happens next? And that is really all we writers are doing. We're trying to tell the tale. What happens next? What happened first? Okay, we now know that's Act 1. What happens next? What happens next? And so the tornado idea comes from looking at the context of your story. Now, this is a complicated idea. This is not in the book. This is new material, so I'm going to give you this as a bonus. So you might want to write down the word context. Now, context, if you were a journalist, would be the 5 W's of your story. Who, what, where, when, and why. And it's amazing to me how many writers don't take the time to really organize this material before they get going. So let's take a minute now. So where does your story start? When does your story start? Who is in your story? Who's the main character? Why are they in the story, which is the subject of many long conversations, but the short version has to be because in some way they're the character that needs to go on the adventure you're creating for them. So let's see, who, what, where, when, and why is the big question. That's really what the Format Your Questions answer is, why now? And the answer is because my character has a dream and it's being challenged, and he wants to realize it, or she wants to realize it. That's the answer to the why question, which is the biggest question. So we say, okay, so we need to have many obstacles. Now, tornadoes happen, why? Well, because they live in Kansas. Now, I know this sounds like it's too simple, and perhaps it is, but I wish that more people would have common sense. So you're not going to have, a tsunami in Kansas City, right? But if your story is set in Japan, and you need an event, well, they have tsunamis in Japan, and, I think they do. I'm not sure. Weather's not my strong point. But the idea is that you apply common sense. So you need to find something that it's an interesting paradox. It's extremely dramatic and almost melodramatic, and yet it has to be the result of your common sense and your basic knowledge about the story that you're writing. And it's amazing how people don't know this. So one of the ways you can find this event is if you're writing a romantic comedy, like Garden State, or loosely a romantic comedy, and your character has not met a love interest by the end of Act 1, guess what? It's a romantic comedy. What has to happen? Well, duh. They have to meet a love interest, right? And the love interest, because we have decided that Act 1 is a nightmare, has to be a dream. So it's a reversal of the standard cute meet or the meet cute in romantic comedies, because usually when characters meet each other in romantic comedies, they hate each other. And here is a reversal where they meet each other and they love each other. A reversal is a term that means roughly that you misdirect your audience, and you want them to think that one thing's going to happen, and then you turn the tables on them and something else happens. And again, this is the subject of another long seminar.